A very warm welcome again to you out in your lounge rooms, offices around the country. This is FSC Connect. It is our way to bring the financial services sector and the Financial Services Council's membership together over this COVID timeframe and well pre and well beyond. It's been a pretty tough 5 weeks, but there is a glimmer of hope, certainly for Auckland. And if you're outside of Auckland, level 2 must feel fantastic. One of the key things about FSC Connect is about keeping us connected to key issues in the marketplace, key issues with our regulators, key issues with some of the issues around the market as we speak. And today's session is no different. So delighted to be joined by Liam Mason, Claire Bollingford, Paul Gregory, and Barbara Pearce from the Financial Markets Authority. I'm delighted to welcome them. It's been a fantastic and open and engaged relationship. We work on so many levels, on so many issues with the FMA, and today is just another example of that. With all of our FSC Connect sessions, as ever, they are designed to be engaged and engaging. So for those of you who know your way around Zoom, the Q&A bar down the bottom, feel free to ask questions as we go. There will be time also towards the end of today's session that we'll engage in a much more open discussion. In terms of our format today, we are on the record, we are recording the discussion. We're going to go first to Liam, then to Claire, then to Paul, and then to Barb, each for their own overview of their particular areas and key issues that are right front and centre right now. And then at the end of 20-25 minutes, we'll kind of have an open discussion and round table. So without further ado, welcome again, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Liam to the conversation. And Liam, the floor is yours, and thanks again.
Kia ora, Richard, and tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much for inviting a few of us from Te Mana Taitai Hoka Hoka to come and talk to you about some of the work we have on at the moment. This afternoon, I'm just going to give or open with a few comments about what we're doing with the Council of Financial Regulators and the priority pieces of work there, and also what we've been focusing on at the FMA, particularly during the recent Delta lockdown or outbreak. And then Claire and Paul and Barbara will give you a bit of a whirlwind tour of some of the highlights in their areas, and we'll leave a lot of time for questions and discussion from there. So to kick in, I thought it'd be useful just to start by talking a little bit about the Council of Financial Regulators, CoFI. And there've been other things in the news in the last week, but last few weeks, but the Reserve Bank of New Zealand Act 2021 passed in Parliament. And one of the things that comes from that is the recognition and statute of the Council of Financial Regulators, which has been established to facilitate cooperation and coordination between members of the Council, regulatory agencies, to support effective and responsive regulation of the financial system in New Zealand. CoFI has been running for nearly 10 years, but this is the first time that it's been formally recognised as a body with a mandate. And that's a reflection of the increasing complexity of our financial regulatory framework and the importance that the regulatory agencies within that framework do a really good job and pay a lot of attention to coordinating with each other, to cooperating, to ensuring that we are, while seeking to achieve our individual mandates, also keeping an eye on those outcomes that we're all looking for the system and for New Zealand. And the work of CoFI is intended to help us to do that. Now, CoFI, the Council, has published a series of priorities that it has in the current period. Those are climate change, where we have a work stream which has invited in both XRB and also the Ministry for the Environment. And that's been focusing on upskilling supervisors within the regulatory agencies to understand the issues that they need to grapple with in terms of climate change, as that becomes a more and more important feature in the financial markets across different sectors. And also working on the law reform initiatives for climate-related disclosures, which are coming upon us fast. Second priority is financial markets conduct, and Claire will talk a little bit more about the work that we've been doing there. It's an area ever since 2018, as you all know, that's been of real interest to all of the regulatory agencies in CoFI, one of the early areas where we realized that we had an awful lot in common. Digital innovation is the third priority, and we have recently launched a website, fintech.govt.nz, which has an ability for fintech firms, for startup teams to make a connection with financial regulators, and where we offer a service to help them to understand the regulation and the regulatory environment that they're going to be working in the fintech space in New Zealand. We also have a priority around financial inclusion, working there with the Retirement Commissioner, of course, and that has published a common vulnerability framework, which we hope will help firms to show, to see that we have a common approach to the increasingly important issue of vulnerability, and as consumers interact with financial institutions right across the regulatory space. And the last area that is a focus for CoFI, a priority at the moment, is regulatory burden and barriers to entry. And there, some of the important work is our banking forum, which has been going for a few years. That also includes the IRD and the Ministry of Justice. And that meets quarterly. It's designed to provide an opportunity for the regulators in the banking sector to discuss the forward-looking plan of regulatory initiatives. The New Zealand Bankers Association now attends those meetings. They're informed by a detailed forward plan of regulatory initiatives, which we update on a quarterly basis, and that we can use as a foundation for discussions with industry around the upcoming priorities, but also the pinch and pain points that might arise from that, whether it's in the policy development or in the implementation phase of those. We are right now establishing, in parallel to that, an insurance forum, and we hope to be able to be telling you more about that in the very near future. CoFI agencies have been working particularly closely together since the first outbreak of the COVID pandemic, both providing regular catch-ups on developments in the financial system, particularly important last year with the international dimension and the turmoil in the markets, but also through its delegates group agreeing deferrals and rescheduling of regulatory initiatives in order to try to ease some of the burden on industry during that period. We've been doing that again this time around, and we've also republished our list of regulatory initiatives to try to give as much of a forward picture as possible to help firms to navigate what's coming, and also to see what is being deferred and where relief is being offered for firms during the COVID period. We are continuing to do joint thematic work, which we started with the conduct and culture work a few years ago now, and that's becoming a more regular part of our joint work with the Reserve Bank in particular, and Barb will probably touch on some of that in a little bit later. And CoFI has recently launched a website where you can go to find more information about the priority items that the firms have. that the regulators have, and also where you can find that regulatory initiatives, which will be updated every quarter. And lastly, on CoFI, I'll just mention that the agencies have recently developed a new memorandum of understanding. It's intended to allow faster and better information sharing among the regulators and the policy agencies as well, and also to include sharing of forward plans. The idea is for us to get much better at coordinating the efforts of the regulators and the policy agencies, as there are increasingly important dependencies between us in terms of the work that we all do in the financial sector. So I'll be very happy to take any questions about CoFI later on. I thought that the next thing I do is just very quickly talk about the FMA's work, starting with the COVID response. This time round, as we did last year, we have focused very much on engaging with industry to understand the impact of the lockdown. Now, based on the engagement, the feedback that we've had this time round, we are not seeing the significant disruption in the market or spikes in call volumes to the same degree as last time, although I understand they're up in many firms. And that's really encouraging, both in terms of how well financial firms have adapted to the most recent lockdown, but also that there seems to be a slightly different level of adjustment in the community as well. We have nonetheless looked to delay a number of initiatives and activities. We've also signalled, as have the other CoFI agencies, that we are once again willing to extend regulatory relief if this is needed, where firms are experiencing particular problems coming out of the lockdown. And we have put that in place for a small number of cases this time round. Again, we haven't seen the same sort of demand that we did this time last year. But we remain open for business on that. We have, at the FMA, along with our CoFI colleagues, been engaging with the Ministry of Health and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet on which parts of the financial services should be essential services this time around. As we're on the cusp of level 3, this is perhaps of diminishing importance right at the moment. But we did find that there was, of course, a tightening of the criteria this time round compared to 2020, and of course it was coordinated through the Ministry of Health and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, as opposed to being delegated through to the regulators this time around. So that has required an additional level of engagement for us, but hopefully has managed to get a fairly satisfactory outcome for most of the industry, at least. And look, as ever on that, we are very open to any feedback or information on issues that are bubbling up, that are coming out of the lockdown. It's a period where we're both very thankful to the industry for your engagement during the period, and really very dependent on you for the information that we need so that we can be as responsive as possible to issues that are arising. So it's a time when it's really important to shout out and give us a call if there's something that we should be knowing about. More broadly, and I'll bring this to a close very quickly because I feel I'm running the clock. The FMA's current priorities more broadly. We have, as you know, a large slate of regulatory reform and implementation in front of us, both FSLAA, which is well underway, but also CoFI, CRD, and other initiatives that are coming at us at a rate of knots as they're coming at you at a rate of knots. So putting our attention to those is number one for us at the moment. We're also, and have signalled that we're going to continue to give priority to our work on ensuring that products and services are true to label, and provide value for money. And Paul will be talking about this a little bit more in the investment services space. It's an area where we are looking beyond our licensed population, also into what I'll call the retail adjacent parts of the wholesale market, where we feel it's important to make the point about the requirements that advertising and marketing be true to label and not false or misleading. We have a continuing focus on good conduct, and Claire no doubt will talk in more detail about our work there. And on the investor capability side, we are responding to the continual growth of retail activity in the markets, upping the support that we have there for inexperienced investors, helping them to have confidence, but also understand the potential pitfalls that come along with some of the new ways that markets can be accessed today. And we have, as we see in the news every day, a real interest in cyber resilience in our licensed and regulated populations, and we are looking to increase our own capability to ensure that part of our monitoring of financial firms includes setting out our expectations for the management of cyber and other operational risks in our regulated entities. And lastly, I'll just finish. Of course, at the FMA, we're very excited to soon be welcoming a new Chief Executive, Samantha Barris, who, allowing for the now normal logistics required to get somebody into the country, should be joining us in January next year. I'm gonna stop there and hand over to Claire to talk about our work and conduct.
Right, Claire, Liam. Kia everybody. So yeah, I'm going to pick up on two of those priorities that Liam just talked about. The first one being our enduring priority on conduct and good conduct practice, and the second one being on this slew of new legislation that's coming through, particularly focused on the conduct of financial institutions regime. So on conduct, we see this as enduring because conduct really matters. As it's what the customer experiences in practice, and it's about the behaviour of an organisation over time towards their customers. So this really is for us about implementing those good practices that ultimately should serve both your business well, but also serve your customers well. We don't just see this as about complying with minimum standards in the law. It is about understanding what those practices are in your frontline, in your systems and controls, and in your governance and operations. So where issues are identified, whether that's through product reviews or whether that's through complaints or other metrics that people are getting in their organisation, it's really important that those root causes of the issues are identified and fixed. And we understand that that can take some time. But what we are seeing as we understand more about some of the poorer practices or some of the mistakes that have been made in the industry is that there's quite mixed practice across the sectors and across the industry in terms of how those issues are identified, how they're fixed, how those root causes are really worked through to make sure that there doesn't need to be a re-remediation of the issue or it doesn't crop up again in the future. So we're very happy, and Barb might talk about this a little bit as well when she comes on to her bit, but we're very happy to actually work with firms on this because we do see those mixed practices out there. So if your firm does experience an issue where it comes to conduct, what we can do is actually sit down and work through what are some of the good practices that we've seen out there. And we've been having a bit of a chat with Richard about whether we can do a specific session to help work through some of those principles that we use as well. So we're happy to do that. But our expectations in terms of conduct are already set out. As Liam said, we've been working on this for some years now. So there is quite a lot of material out there on our website that you can already use. So there's our Good Conduct Guide from 2017, which set out a number of questions that you can ask yourself about how your firm operates in practice and whether you do have good conduct principles and practices in place. And we've also got our culture and conduct reviews that have been completed jointly with the Reserve Bank in terms of banks and life insurers. And also we recently published our desk-based review into the fire and general market. Now, you might look at those as very sector specific, and certainly some of the recommendations are relevant to those sectors. But actually, in terms of the broad recommendations that are coming out, we do think it's actually quite useful across the licensed population to consider some of those and how within your sector they might impact on your business. But put really simply, we're looking for some core elements to be present within businesses. So it is very simply about treating customers fairly throughout the life cycle of products. So that's about having really good governance and accountability in place within your business and setting the right culture to enable good conduct practices to grow. It's also about having good systems and controls in place. So it's hard to know if there are any poor practices or any errors are occurring if actually you don't have controls and assurance, and a good two-way communication between the frontline and management around what really is the practice, what are customers experiencing in actuality. So having those good systems and controls and a good way of having information flow across the business is really important for that. And then, as I said earlier, identifying and fixing any issues as they arise in a timely way. So those simply are our expectations in this space. But we are looking to refresh our conduct guide, which is, as I said, was from 2017, just to bring together what we've learned from the culture and conduct reviews that we've undertaken and make sure that that's kind of refreshed, particularly in line with the legislation that's coming in. So in terms of that legislative change that's coming through for us, we do have 5 pieces of legislation that we're working through at the minute. We have the new financial advice regime, which Barb will talk about in a moment. We have the changes to insurance contract law that are being proposed by the government. Now, we haven't yet seen any legislation on that, but we do know the policy intent. So we expect that to be, a reasonable amount of work, both for us and the industry when that comes forward. We've got the climate-related disclosures work that's going through at the moment, financial markets infrastructure, which jointly with the Reserve Bank will be responsible for regulating and are well on the way to implementing that part of the plumbing regulation for financial services. And finally, the conduct of financial institutions regime. So that legislation is still in the process of making its way through Parliament. It's at second reading at the moment. And we do still have, as you'll probably be aware, a few outstanding policy issues that are yet to be landed by the government, particularly in relation to intermediaries and how providers and intermediaries will be considered within the legislation, and also what type of regulations might be required to sit underneath the Act when it comes into force, and that's particularly around incentives and also the specific treatment of Lloyd's of London when it comes to the regime. So we are expecting further consultation, particularly on the timing for the regime itself, and also what it might cost. So how much the FMA might need to increase its funding requirement by in order to regulate the regime when it comes into force. The regime itself is designed to be mostly principles-based, so it can be flexible to different business models, to different sizes of firms. And our approach is very much to consider proportionality as we are looking to implement the new regime once it's agreed. And very much along the lines of other regimes that we've been implementing recently, our initial approach is very much one of support and education. So we will be reaching out to talk to the industry further about what guidance, once the regime's clear, what guidance might be useful to support people in terms of thinking about their own firms and how they implement this in practice. But we do see this as a continual journey. As I said, conduct will also be a priority for us, both in banking and insurance, but across our regulated population. And we do recognise that these type of regimes do take some time to embed as well. So what we want to do is make sure that we're supporting the industry in terms of implementing that good practice and then embedding it so it's sustainable over time. Now that said, if we see misconduct, if we see firms that we feel have acted well outside of our expectations, we will take action in that regard. So, but what we do want to do is really promote that good practice where we see it, and hopefully provide a conduit whereby we can work with the industry to really share that and make sure that the bar is raised across the piece. So on that note, I will hand over to Paul to talk more about KiwiSaver and value for money. Paul.
Thanks, Claire, and good afternoon, everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa. Just a few things for me to cover off, and the first thing is about, and of course not everybody is involved in this on the call, but we're involved in the default provider transition process, which of course is a significant exercise involving members and their assets. So we are working on that with MB and Inland Revenue, and that's going well. The Minister has not yet signed off the regulations that govern that, but that's not too far away as I understand it. Also, for those that are involved, we've recently set out some expectations about how we want certain aspects of that transition from a member and from an asset perspective to go, including what our regulatory stance is likely to be for those situations that almost inevitably will occur. For example, where there's a SIPO breach because of cash levels being exceeded in the course of the transition, that sort of thing. But then also our focus is switching to what happens when the new providers are all in place with their instruments of appointment from the 1st of December, and what our reporting requirements will be for how they're measuring up to their new instruments of appointment. So that will be a combination of what's in those instruments of appointment, obviously, which is service level agreements, member engagement requirements, that sort of thing, plus any additional things that we want to know about. We're interested in, for example, in the traffic in and out of those new default funds, given that one of the design principles was that they're supposed to be open to all members, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. And of course, the settings mean the nature of those have changed. So they used to be regarded, rightly in most cases, as a sort of a parking space, but now that they're balanced, have lower fees and other features, they don't quite have that status anymore. So our monitoring status or stance towards those has adjusted or will adjust somewhat. And the other thing we'll be looking to include in the reports is where providers have made undertakings or promises in their RFP responses. We'll be making sure we don't miss any of those either. So that's on default providers. More broadly on KiwiSaver, obviously value for money. So we are most of the way through the process with the supervisors now of the pilot that we did with a number of managers, just to road test the implementation of that guidance. Obviously, it's not about revisiting the guidance itself. It's about how it becomes a sort of an annual review habit for all the industry, and delivering the intent of that guidance without being unnecessarily burdensome and as efficient as possible. So as I think I've said a few times, we'll be doing a report on that to the providers who are involved in the pilot, but also to industry in general about what we've learned about the practices that we've seen, and about the process itself for making it into an annual review. Then, as you may also have seen from media, and also more importantly in our annual corporate plan, which we put out, we're about to start a process where we're looking at integrated financial products, which is our and central government's terminology for ESG. And the point of that is looking to see where funds have explicitly labelled themselves or have otherwise made use of terms like ethical, responsible, ESG, etc., how they actually go ahead and articulate that, and as importantly, substantiate it. So that will be largely desk-based to start off with, because we're conscious of a lot of other demands from ourselves and other regulators on industry. And again, part of the outputs of that will be, as well as individual feedback to the providers that we select for that, there'll be a more public report, anonymised, which will set out what we liked, what we didn't like quite so much, and lessons for the industry, for investors, and for ourselves about how we implement that guidance, because sustainability is table stakes and there's just going to be more of it. Then also a couple of other things on advertising. So we did a consultation a little while ago on advertising guidance. We had a number of submissions on that, and we have been working through those, and the final version of that guidance is imminent. So we've had a lot of feedback on that from FSC members, and it's really appreciated. And just finally as well, we've also had some feedback from providers about advice in KiwiSaver, given the change in legislation. So back in 2017, we published the what was at the time revised guidance on advice in KiwiSaver, and broadened the class advice definition to make it easier to offer, because we had understood that some providers were taking a reasonably conservative approach to helping New Zealanders who needed help with KiwiSaver. And we've started to see some early signs of the same thing reoccurring now that class advice no longer exists and a new regime is in. So we've been thinking internally about how we get back to a position where people are getting help that they need, and we'll be reissuing that guidance reasonably shortly, including probably a slightly refreshed view on the use of incentives, because we've seen that growing a lot with providers and with advice platforms as well. So that will be coming out fairly shortly. So that was a bit of a trot through the issues that we've got going on in investment management, and happy to take any questions at the end. And now on to Barb.
Kia ora, everyone. So I've got 3 topics to cover off today. An update on FSLAA monitoring and the governance thematic that's being done jointly with the RBNZ. So messages from the FA team in respect of the progress of FSLAA. Currently, we have just over 1,700 transitional FAP licenses and 1,300 authorised bodies. And to date, we've granted just over 107 or circa 107 full licenses. So you can see there's a fair way to go with processing those over the next year or so. So messages from the FA team are essentially, please don't leave your applications too late. Apply early to avoid not having your application assessed before the cut-off March 2023. The FMA has a range of resources available. There's a dedicated section on our website that you can tap into, which has information around application guides and information sheets. In addition to that, the financial advice team are running some virtual forums. They were going to be in person, but given the lockdown situation, they've now converted those. To date, they've had success with running these for Class 1 and Class 2 in New Plymouth, Palmerston North and Napier, and the next tranche in October will be for Tauranga, Rotorua, Taupō, Northland, Gisborne and Ashburton. So they'll be reaching out to invite people to attend those, sign up for those. They will provide some expectations, some tips, and cover off how to apply, provide some more details on how to apply for your full licence. The FA team are also engaging directly with Class 3 entities and asking that if you haven't already reached out for some assistance, please do so. They're happy to help, and they you know, the earlier you get in, the more help we can give you while we've got that capacity. So I think that was all the updates I have for the FA team. In respect of monitoring, we always start off with a plan each year, but it seems over the last couple of years that's had to be rejigged and rethought, given particularly the COVID situation. A lot of our monitoring is done on site or desk-based, so of course we can't do that at the moment. And we're also mindful of the regulatory burden that will place on entities, especially in the current state. So our proposed monitoring was in respect of the derivatives issuer sector. We've just about completed that before lockdown, so there's just a couple more to do. And off the back of that, we'll do a bit of an assessment on any key themes or issues that we've pulled out from what we've seen, and it will likely feed into an end of year monitoring report sum up that will be external out to the industry. Or if we did find any serious issues that might lead to some sort of regulatory action, you may get some messaging from us sooner than that as part of that process. We're also planning to do some DIMS monitoring and MIS monitoring, but these will occur after we've completed our sector risk assessments for those sectors. We've currently kicked off the DIMS one and contacted all the DIMS providers who will be in that. We're proposing an online form with question set to go out around mid-October, but that is subject to the lockdown situation and whether entities will still have capacity to deal with that now. So we're mindful that we might push hold on that depending on what happens with the lockdown situation. What else have we got on? We're proposing later in the year, on our plan was to do some AML reporting entity monitoring as well, but again, we're rethinking what that looks like given the current situation. Some of the key themes or part of our scope at the moment is around suitability, governance and cyber. We're actually in the process of increasing our cyber capability and getting some more resources and setting up a bit of a framework for how we might oversee and monitor that for our licensed population. The last section to cover off is the joint RBNZ FMA governance thematic. So we've actually held off progressing that due to the level 3 and 4 lockdowns that happened shortly after we announced it. So the proposed next steps are we will be sending joint letters out to entities who are in the proposed sample, notifying them of that fact, and to give them a little bit more information on the proposed scope, the process and the timing, or the likely timing. The process will include a desk-based component and also an on-site component, but it's unlikely we'll get on-site anywhere this before Christmas. We will also update the website comms at the same time, essentially saying if you don't receive the letter, you're not going to be in the sample. That's about everything that I had, and happy to take any questions or incorporate with the general question section. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Barb, and thanks everyone for the highlights tour of all things FMA. Really good to get across the breadth of the organisation, the breadth of activity, and of course within the FSC community, there are lots of people hard at work, responding, addressing, connecting on not perhaps all, but on many of these themes. I thought maybe just in terms of some of the Q&A, there's been a few that have come through. I thought I just might toss a couple of questions. Liam, firstly to you if I can. You picked up that point around, essential services definitions and the clarification and who made the call and how and then it got addressed. I guess with the question of how do we make sure that if there is another lockdown, that kind of clarity of essential services, financial services, yes, you can open. That doesn't mean open your branches necessarily, but it does mean you can still operate your business. Because there was a period of time in those first few days where there were people who assumed that level 4 meant level 4 continue to operate. In fact, were in breach, but they didn't realise that. And so that was obviously a really difficult few days whilst there was that ambiguity.
Mm. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Richard. And I guess the simple answer is we'll learn from this time around, because this is partly a result of those court proceedings that were taken after the first lockdown, where the court found that some parts of that first lockdown were only pretty legal, I think is the term. And that means that the questions of essential services is being done more formally now. That has taught us that it requires a lot more effort, actually, from people at the FMA and the other CoFI members to make sure that we are talking to the central parts of government who really don't have everyday familiarity with the operations of financial services to make sure that we're getting the message across as to the essential elements of the infrastructure. But also we've learnt about things like the standing permission within the essential services orders to allow people to access premises to keep their businesses otherwise operational, which is something that really answered the question for a large part of the services. So that's something, as we do our lessons learned for this time round, we'll be looking to bottle for the future and have those messages a little more ready to go.
Great, thank you. Yeah, because I mean, certainly within the sector, we collectively rallied once we were clear that it was not clear, and there were endless conversations with the ministers and ministers' officers, with the regulators. So, want to acknowledge the FMA's role in helping in that ambiguous time to get stuff done. So that was really useful. Probably a question just to toss to each of you, but picking up the theme of customers and how the New Zealand community's kind of been pretty resilient this time around in lockdown, as evidenced by call centre volumes, Liam, which you addressed, and hardship claims out of KiwiSaver. And it's this kind of customer resilience that has both been difficult for vulnerable customers and, on the other side, opportunistic for people who've jumped into online trading platforms, for example. So kind of just interested in people's observations on this differences, but overall it feels like we're in a much better place than perhaps we might have thought.
Well, I'll go first on that. I think one of the features here, and it seems very simple, is for a lot of folk this time around that what we're hearing, the sense is more, here we go again. So some of the uncertainty is taken out of the situation, and that just naturally reduces the anxiety somewhat. There are other features that are still with us, though. So just as last time round, as we've said, that we will put some effort into deferring initiatives to allow firms to focus on their customers, because that's what we're asking them to do at this time. We also signal again that we will have absolutely no patience at all for anybody who's looking to take advantage of the situation. And one thing we learnt from last time round is that when a lot of New Zealanders are spending more time at home, spending more time online, the opportunities to fall victim to scams and frauds simply go up because you're got more time to look at things that you would otherwise dismiss. And so we've put out another warning last week about the types of scams that we're seeing crop up. So there are some features that have still got us concerned, and much as last time, but I suspect as a starting point, just some of the unknown has been taken out of it this time around, and that's been it's been really great the way both firms but also customers have responded.
Great, thanks, Liam. Claire, your take on that?
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's as you said, I think it's great to see that there's been more resilience this time around, and I agree with Liam. I think some of that is that people are better prepared. we have issued a further update to our customer vulnerability guidelines over the course of the last month. And I'd really recommend that firms do have a look at that. Just because there isn't this big surge of customer contact, I think doesn't mean that necessarily there aren't people who are not only more vulnerable as a result of being in lockdown or indeed any of the restrictions that are across the country at the minute, but also, have concerns about their financial well-being more broadly, and could use some more consideration given perhaps by some financial services providers to that. So we've been very pleased over the course of the last 18 months to see the industry really step up to give more consideration to these topics, particularly around vulnerability, and it's still one of those emerging practices. I think it's fair to say where people are trying to grapple with the challenge of it. It's not easy, particularly considering some customers who may be vulnerable might not consider themselves as vulnerable. So, how you get around that as a firm and still provide good care and support to customers. It really does, I think, we believe, coming back to that knowing more about your customer and being able to respond to the particular circumstances they find themselves in. And I think that's just as important now as it ever was. So again, recommend having a look at the guidance and ask us any questions if you'd like more on that.
Great, thanks, Claire. Paul.
Yeah, it's been well covered. I think just another aspect or another element of people being at home, of course, is another reason why we did at one stage pulling a little bit longer on getting the advertising guidance out. But obviously, that is one thing that people can do. So that's another reason why we've just decided to press on with that. And as Liam said, within the sort of the broader context of having a pretty careful think internally about what we could delay or stop doing to enable industry to focus on what we've asked them to do, in terms of behaviour that sought to take advantage of it, we actually went the other way and decided we'd probably act more quickly on anything like that we saw. So that's part of the context. And as Claire was talking about, in situations like this, vulnerability is not necessarily anything to do with age or to do with level of education or to do with access to assets. It's entirely situational, and so that just takes some more careful thought on our part and on industry's part as to who is and who is not vulnerable and when.
Thanks, Paul. Barb, anything you wanted to add to the conversation on that one?
Just maybe around suitability. There's a lot of people at home and dabbling in products like derivatives issuers. So if you're someone who's facilitating that product, make sure you've got your suitability testing all in place. People are having a go at some of these higher risk products, and they might not actually have the skill or experience to have a good experience with it.
Yeah, it's interesting when we, through COVID, we've launched our resilience index, and we've launched the rise of retail platforms and tracking behaviour and how it's changed. Perhaps not because of COVID, but perhaps accelerated because of COVID. And we've been in, the bull market, so most things have gone well. So it's kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and what might be hidden underneath, the great rise and the great returns, because in the end, wise and informed consumers can play through all parts of the cycle rather than, time on your hands. A new platform and a rising market leads to, certain types of behaviours. I just thought, just picking up another thing that's been coming through the FSC community a lot this time around, and not sure who wants to pick up on the conversation. It's just about mental health and resilience. It feels like this time around, it's been a tougher road to hoe. 5 weeks now in Auckland. That's not only within staff, within the sector and people within the sector, but the people that we're serving. And wondered whether anyone had any threads or comments to address on that.
Yeah, I think I think the sheer duration of this is one of the real challenges there, Richard. And certainly, you know, within our own shop, one of the things we're very aware of is the sharpening of that for those of you who are in Auckland when you see the rest of the country under different conditions and enjoying their liberty. So it's something that we've had to be very aware of ourselves, and also very aware of as we think about our regulatory activity, being aware of the fact that that operations extend nationwide, and so thinking that we're interacting just with a Wellington firm, and in fact that may have some implications beyond there. I think more broadly, it's something that plays into vulnerability for scams and frauds. Mental health and your well-being can certainly affect your vulnerability there, and that's something that we are quite concerned about as the situation extends, particularly for Auckland.
Yeah, there's been, picking up the governance side on this in relation particularly to health and safety plans and BCPs and so on. The learning in the first COVID was, can you remote your workforce and turn on a dime inside a couple of weeks? Answer equals yes, but the deeper question, or the more ongoing question, is how do you keep your people engaged, and how do you keep them motivated, particularly when, like all of us, we're running, professional and personal lives that converge, and kids and animals and so on and so forth. So, I think there'll be some kind of interesting things that come through. And, we ran one of these FSC Connects in the last couple of weeks with a number of members, and, people are having days off, or people are having, random acts of kindness, or people are having vaccination opportunities to go and take the day off, or whatever. So it's it feels like that's playing also well, not that far underneath the surface. Liam, I'm just going to come to you on the CoFI piece. And one of the residual conversations we have within our reg community is, we understand CoFI, and it's great to see CoFI playing into a much more cohesive and structured and at law, given a mandate. The question picks up some of the reg overload piece, but also the prioritisation. So with so much reg change coming down the pipe, how will CoFI figure out almost the queue, the order of what's important, given that almost every agency, almost also has their own playbook over and above the CoFI playbook? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so I mean, step one, make sure I'm off mute. Step one in that, Richard, is actually having the conversation, and it's a reasonably new thing for us to be doing that properly, and doing that on a sustained basis. So initiatives such as the table of regulatory plans, laying that out for the sector, and having a conversation, and using that as well as regulators to turn around and be talking to government, saying, well, here are the suite of plans that you have. We have a job to make sure that this lands well, that it lands effectively, and that it serves the purpose for New Zealanders that we want it to serve. And that means not being overly rushed, and being done in a considered and well thought out way. And simply getting that conversation going, and putting those choices down gets us some of the way. But a big part of it is increasing engagement with industry, because we probably don't usually fully comprehend from our viewpoint exactly how this will land and what it will take to land an initiative. So you'll have regulators or government agencies thinking in good faith that things can be done in parallel that don't really work that way within the firms. So I think just increasing that conversation is a really important part of it.
Great, yeah, because again, I mean, we've had these conversations in camera well before, but that alignment, CoFI and FSLAA are kind of aligned because they pick up, there's a lot of overlap. So how do we make sure that is ordered and structured and in a way that kind of works for everybody? So anyway, more an observation than anything else.
Yeah.
Perhaps, look, closing question for everyone. It's been a pretty rigorous couple of years. In 12 months' time, end of 2022, where do you think we're going to all be in terms of the runway of reg change and so forth? And maybe we'll start in the same order. And Barb, last word will be with you. Liam.
Okay, well, I'll take the first punt and the others can have rebuttal. I think we want to, there's a feeling in the FMA that, one of our priorities is to make sure the FMA is fit for the future, and that's in recognition of the sheer volume of change that's coming both for us and the industry at the moment. We want to see the financial advice reforms bedded in well. In 12 months' time, we won't be quite there, but we should be very, very well on the way there. And be looking for, really quite mature understanding from the industry at that point of what's required. And in partial response to one of the questions that come up in Q&A, we should also have a really clear understanding of the interplay between that legislation and the CoFI legislation, which will be fast upon us at that time. One of the things more broadly that I think we have seen and everybody's seen in the last little while is that the pace of change generally is picking up across markets, across products, across services. The way that consumers adapt and adopt seems to be changing more rapidly than it has in the past. The way that services are developed and rolled out is changing more rapidly than it has in the past. And so from the FMA's point of view, what I hope is that we have improved our own adaptability and ability to learn so that we can be as responsive as possible to the way that we see changes both in markets and also consumers, and that we're building our understanding, particularly of a large new cohort of consumers who will be beneficiaries of the work that we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Liam. Claire.
Yeah, thanks. So it's hard to rebut much of that, really. So eloquently put it. So I think I'd probably just back out with two things. So from my perspective, so one is clarity, so more clarity, which means we can plan better. And the second is, we are really keen to, as we've said, engage more, but importantly, if we can share more good practice as a regulator quite often, and Barb can speak to this, what we generally do is go out looking for harm. That's kind of part of our job. So that means we see poor practice and then we report on that. But what we want to do is make sure that actually we can build better trust and confidence in the sector by lifting all boats and showing the good practice that exists, so that actually we can do it all quicker and learn together.
Fantastic. Paul.
So I'm just starting the video. So echoing that, I think we'll probably see another some more developments from what's already starting to happen. If you're just talking about investment management, which is sort of a shift in consumer preference, they're waking up to value for money. Sustainability is becoming table stakes. People and providers are getting more interested in alternative assets. And are getting prepared to invest in assets that are illiquid. And I think we'll also, because of the work that we're doing internally to recognise where we are and where we're pointed with a much bigger mandate with of course, the CoFI coming in and the associated pieces also with climate disclosures, that we will be having a bit of a rethink about how we internalise and communicate externally what our overall regulatory approach is. So I think that there will be some more clarity for for the financial sector about how we think about our role and how we intend to deliver it, and that we should be able to signal even more effectively than what we try to do right now about why we're looking somewhere, who we're looking at, and what we intend to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. And Barb, last word to you.
Just off the back of Claire's comment, actually, we really want to catch people doing good, and where we see examples of processes or things working really well, we want to share those sort of examples with industry via our external reporting, because maybe it'll work for someone else as well, or you can adapt something for your own use as well, which has the outcome, leads on to better outcomes for customers overall. So wherever we can feedback that sort of messaging, we will do that as well.
Fantastic. Folks, at 4:32, that's been a really excellent around the grounds and just picking up some key things. We obviously didn't get to everything as we knew we wouldn't have, but I just wanted to acknowledge everybody's participation. Thank you to the FMA. As I said right up front, the engagement is fantastic. The willingness to turn up and talk, not quite off the cuff, but on a range of topics, on a range of issues, is really, really welcomed. To the people watching and listening, thanks for tuning in. And this video will be available next week on FSC Connect and on our YouTube channel. In the meantime, we're on the countdown clock. If you're in Auckland, it's less than 24 hours before you can run out and get anything, pizza, coffee, whatever. So on that generous note, thanks everyone, and we'll see you on the next program. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.